Faithful Saints is dedicated to promoting truth and correct principles based on the gospel of Jesus Christ. Though the truth is oftentimes uncomfortable, the Savior said it will set us free. The truth, no matter how uncomfortable, leads to Christ. Visit us at faithfulsaints.com for more. This is a classic episode which was originally recorded in December 2012. This talk was given at a Faithful Saints get-together dinner and has some background noise.
Okay, well, I'll give you just a little bit of a background of kind of how I got into writing.
You're a lawyer?
Yeah.
And a BYU. Did you go to BYU Law School?
Yeah. I went to BYU undergrad as well.
Who was the king of the law at the time? Was it?
Razban was right after. I can see as Hanson. Yeah. So I went to BYU undergrad. I was planning on being a music major, actually. Being a performer, I was a music major. I play a whole bunch of instruments. Been planning since I was like 8 years old to be a professor of music. Had a stark surprise in my life, and Heavenly Father told me to change direction, so I ended up getting a degree in history. I got a degree in logic, and the music degree kind of stuck on the back burner. Then I went to law school, which is something I promised my family I would never do. My mom was a legal secretary for 20 years and said, whatever you do, don't be a lawyer. So I followed her advice strictly. While I was at law school, I co-authored 2 volumes with John Welch. I don't know how many of you are familiar with him. I imagine if not, you're familiar with Farms, and Hugh Nibley's work was published by Farms. John Welch is their founder. I wrote 2 volumes of Ancient Near Eastern Law with him, and that kind of got me started on the whole authorship thing. I also did a 50-page paper with him on Deuteronomic law in the Book of Mormon, which is a really fascinating topic that's been completely ignored in the Mormon Church for reasons that are totally mysterious to me. But if you study the Old Testament well, you'll discover that the Book of Deuteronomy was never followed by the Jews. They never really had it until New Testament time. It was lost and found by King Josiah, and then it wasn't really implemented. And then we've got the 400 years intertestamental period where it started to be used but really wasn't implemented. The Book of Mormon, however, had that book. We know it had that book because it's quoted and it's discussed, and they followed those laws and laws that aren't in the rest of the Pentateuch. And so we see what happens to a people that follows the Book of Deuteronomy rather than just following the rest of the law of Moses. So I did a 50-page paper on that, presented at Farms Symposium, and that was really, really fun. And I got to meet a lot of scholars and started rubbing shoulders with a bunch of people at Farms, and I was hooked.
Is that on the EDU website?
No, it's nowhere. He promised us he would publish it, and it was going to be in this book. There were a whole bunch of us that wrote. Noel Reynolds, if you're familiar with him, he's a well-known scholar at BYU. He was president of BYU or something later, wasn't he? Or not president, vice president or something. Anyway, he's a big shot, and he wrote a paper for it and did a neat presentation. It was all going to be published, and then it never did. So it just kind of sat on the back shelf. You can get it to me directly if you're interested. Just email me. I'll get you a free copy.
Okay, that'd be good.
So anyway, I started getting really interested in writing, and I've enjoyed writing for a long time. I got my degree in history was on ancient Near Eastern peoples and societies. My senior thesis was on Adamic mythologies, and as I started studying Adamic mythologies, the book of Moses, the Apocalypse of Moses, is one of those pseudepigraphical writings that turns out was written by early Jewish Christians, and it has temple symbolism all over it. And it was written by the very first Christians who broke off from the apostles in about 70 AD. They followed the prophecies that the temple would be sacked, and they saw the signs coming. They moved to a place called Pella, avoided it, and they wrote all these teachings that they purport came directly from Jesus that aren't in our standard scriptures. So I thought that was really interesting, started discovering the people who wrote it and finding out more about them. And next thing I would know, I was really curious about all these teachings about Adam. And I was talking to my father-in-law about it, and he started telling me about Adam God teachings. And I said, I've read everything the churches put out on Adam God teachings, that Brigham was misquoted, and this, that, and the other. So I don't think so. So he gave me a book that I highly don't recommend, called Adam God, and it was written by Craig Tholson. Have any of you run across that book by chance? I hated it. I really enjoyed the content, but he's constantly, page after page, brethren need to repent and need to start teaching this. And I just thought, and who are you? Why are you telling the prophets and apostles what they should and should not be teaching? So I didn't like it, but I found myself really fascinated by the topic. And so I started looking into it further because I wanted to know what was really going on. And as I did, I found a really big problem in academia. And this is what Brian was referring to earlier. It just really frustrates me. You've got apologists on one hand who try to say what they think is faith promoting, but is based on bad information, and ultimately it looks like a bunch of lies if somebody looks into it further. And on the other hand, you've got fundamentalists who are out to convert the world to leave the church. And so I'm reading all these books and I'm thinking, why hasn't somebody just written a book where I can sit down and see what Brigham taught, see what Heber C. Kimball taught, see what Jedediah M. Grant taught, and not have to worry about everybody's interpretation and converting me somewhere. And because there was no such thing, I remembered a quote from C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis said, I write books that I want to read, but that nobody's written. And I thought, oh no, I don't know if I want to write a book on Adam God teachings. Who knows what kind of trouble that could get me into. But I started compiling the information. The more I did, the more I enjoyed it. And I said, there's some really good information here. And there's no safe place for Mormons to go read about it, right? You can go to Gerald and Sandra Tanner, and you can read about how Brigham Young taught all these things and it's false doctrine, and you're going to burn in hell if you don't believe it, and you burn in hell if you do believe it. You need to be a Baptist. And then you can go and listen to somebody who says it was never taught and have I'm a liar written all over the top of their thing. There are hundreds and hundreds of quotes on it. So I endeavored to write a book that would be a safe environment where people could learn everything there is to know about it and not have somebody shoving their opinions down your face. And so that was my first endeavor. And of course you can imagine, because Brigham was misquoted, he never really said it, that it would be a very thin book. But here it is. I've divided it into 50 different topics of Adam God teachings. This was not passed by Journal and Discourse 1, Volume 1, page 50 to 52, passing quote. He taught it in great depth. It's all over in journals. It's all over in Mormon literature. It's everything. There's lots and lots of stuff. So I just took their quotes, though. I arranged them chronologically. I cut them out, and I didn't comment on them. I just said, here's what they had to say. And I did an analysis. It's a very kind of, would you say, boring, Brian? Analysis at the end of each section to point out some textual discrepancies or cross-references and that sort of stuff. But I don't go into teaching what Brigham was I think he does a good job by himself. He doesn't need my help. So that kind of got me started in writing on Mormon topics. And with a degree in history, I can't stop. I love to write. I love to research, and I'm addicted to it. Yeah.
Did Brian say you had access to stuff that other authors didn't? What was that?
Yeah, that's probably comes in a little bit later. But on that, when I published this book, I found every volume that has ever been put out on Adam God teachings, whether it's pamphlets, whether it's books, online stuff. I communicated with people who had compilations from old things in newspapers that had never been published. Found some of my own. In fact, since I've compiled this, I've got about 5 or 6 more pages of materials that have never been published on Adam God teachings, and quite a few in there. My most unique research that I've done has not been on that topic. The value of this book, and will continue to be for probably 30, 40 years, if not forever, is that anything that's ever been published previous to 2005 when I wrote that is in it. It's got everything. And so all these other books, if you want to read commentary on what Brigham was teaching, if you want somebody to kind of explain it to you, then those other books have their value. But if you just want to find every quote that there ever was, this is it, and including a lot of stuff that was never published before then. So I don't know if that's what you had in mind, or I was thinking you probably meant more of the newer stuff. But so at any rate, I did that. It's had a fabulous response. I've got to meet hundreds and hundreds of neat people, literally from all over the world. I have people emailing me from Spain. One misguided gentleman emailed me and said, "I love your book. It's fabulous. I've been preaching it to my entire congregation. What next?" And I said, "Well, you have to keep in mind this is not an official doctrine of the church, and you might want to keep your mouth shut." I haven't heard from him since, so I don't know what happened. But I kind of worry for him. I've known people. I've met people from all over the world who have had experiences getting in trouble for teaching it or whatnot. And other people who, stake presidents, bishops, whatever, who just don't care because they've read it and they know it was taught. You can't deny it was taught. Whether it's speculation, whether it's false, that's for the individual to take on themselves. That's for the church to make their official pronouncements, not me. I just want to say, look, I don't want people leaving the church because they're taught this by anti-Mormons. I want to be able to see it on their own value, what this is. And on the other hand, I don't want to be out promoting different offshoots and that sort of stuff. Did you have a question?
Did you run into any official roadblocks in publishing it? I've heard most of the people that, if not all of them, that previously that have commented on that topic have been excommunicated because they were told not to publish it. But I suspect maybe it was because of their commentary, not necessarily the content.
I think that was a big portion of it. For me, I was a little bit naive. I knew that people got into trouble. I had a good friend that actually got excommunicated for believing it, and he didn't know what to do because they said if you just say you don't believe it, then we won't give you any church discipline. He says, "Well, I won't teach it, I won't say anything, but I believe it. So what do I do?" And they said, "Well, we'll kick you out." So they excommunicated him. When my bishop talked to me about the book as it was done, I didn't ask anybody permission. I just self-published. I published 1,000 copies. It's sold more than any other book of its type. I went to him. He was grumpy about it, but he bought a book. And then he said, "I think you ought to just talk to the stake president because I'm kind of concerned that you wrote this book." I said, "All right, fine." So I talked to the stake president, and he says, kind of blushingly, "Well, I really don't know anything about this topic. What is it? And I don't know why you're here." So it was a pretty softball approach for me. So anyway, I finished that book, and I ran across other topics that were of interest to me, and I wrote my next book. I wrote is called "Silencing Mormon Polygamy," and I got really curious about post-manifesto marriages and what played there. Yeah.
As you're changing topics, have you read any of Margaret Barker's work with
I've been
on
referred
Adam and
the dual Adam thing?
yeah, because she's done some of the stuff she's pulled up with that is just amazing.
Yeah. I addressed that briefly in the podcast. It wasn't for Margaret Barker though. I've been referred to her on some temple stuff, and it's on my to-buy list, but I haven't got to it yet, so no, I haven't. That said...
I think it's the Great High Priest is the one that really touches on the Adam as the archetype, and the parallels are incredible that she pulls from like the Gnostic writings and the pseudo-fictical.
Yeah, that's what initially got me interested, was a lot of that material. I just haven't seen any of her stuff for sale. I need to talk to Chris.
It's really expensive too.
Yeah. Well, fortunately for me, I've got a good trade credit with Benchmark, so maybe I'll be able to pull that off. But I don't know if you know Sid Unrau, but he's a good friend of mine. He's pushed me onto that as well. So at any rate, I started working on a book, and it ended up being way, way bigger than I wanted it to be. And my experience with Out of God teachings told me that if a book's this thick, then only the people who are really interested are going to buy it, and which is fine. But I thought there was a broader appeal, so I separated it in a couple of different volumes, one of which I haven't finished. But in the process, I got interested in the whole research on post-manifesto plural marriages. How many of you are familiar with D. Michael Quinn? You know who he is? And only half. Okay. D. Michael Quinn. How many of you have read his Post-Manifesto Plural Marriages, LDS Church Authority and Post-Manifesto Plural Marriages, 1890 to 1904? Okay, about the same. Okay. Well, I read his work on that, and I don't know what your experience was when you read it, but my experience was this big cloud of confusion and question marks over the top of my head. I read it with my wife, and at the end of the day, we just thought, it just sounds like everything that was ever said during this period was a big fat lie, and it just felt confusing. I didn't get it. On the other hand, when he wrote it, he was a BYU religion professor, and he got permission from Gordon Hinckley. That's how he refers to him, but anyway, sorry. But he refers to him as Gordon Hinckley. He says he got permission for publishing the book, and he wanted to help people who were descendants of post-manifesto polygamists to know whether or not they were actually legitimately sealed, and whether or not their work needed redone and this sort of thing. Really interesting topic, and so I got more involved in trying to find that out. B. Carmen Hardy is, by the way, a descendant of some post-manifesto polygamists in Mexico, and so that's where he got interested in it and started writing it. He's a professor at Cal State Fullerton, and that's not too far from where Quinn was teaching at the time. He's kind of unemployed right now, from what I understand, and unemployable. So I started looking into that, and again, I found the same thing. I found a lot of fundamentalists writing about it, and I get really frustrated with sloppy scholarship and citations and lack of citations and allegations that aren't substantiated, and I didn't like seeing all of that garbage. On the other hand, there's a lot of people in the church who just say, well, that manifesto stopped polygamy. You see it in Salt Lake Tribune. Every time you read about what's going on with Warren Jeffs or FLDS, they say the church stopped polygamy in 1890. And that's a lie, too. They did not. It did not happen. It did not stop. In fact, there's a quote by Francis M. Lyman, who's president of the Quorum of 12, who said that the manifesto didn't become operative until 1904, which was very new to me. I don't know if any of you have heard that before. I found a quote in the Salt Lake Tribune that I read. One of the funnest things about being a historian is reading all the microfiche, and you get scrolling on the old newspapers and blowing them up and squinting to read. Anyway, this was one I found. I found a quote that said just what I just told you, and I thought, wow, that's a really interesting quote. I'm going to use it for a footnote. But it came from a fundamentalist source, and I don't mean to badmouth fundamentalists. I actually know more about them than I like. But a lot of their scholarship's really, really bad, and so I thought I better double-check my source here, and I went and I double-checked the source, and it wasn't there. And I've got a database I've been compiling with friends and for about a decade now that's to die for. It's anything you could ask for 19th century in electronic format, one way or the other, and it's all searchable. So I start searching for this quote, nowhere to be found. So I think, this is propaganda, and I kind of throw it away. So I'm looking through these old newspapers, looking for an article, and I'm accidentally, I didn't know at the time, but I was a year off on the microfiche. I pulled the wrong one. So I was reading this whole newspaper, looking for something that was in a different microfiche, and I found this quote. See if I can find it real quick. Okay, this is the Salt Lake Tribune, and they found it. They were exposing post-manifesto polygamists by the hundreds. There's over 200 people that they found. They put a list on. Not only did they do that, but they give details in the articles. You can go read the articles, and there'll be a third page about a polygamist, and they'll tell you where he lived, and who his wives were, and how many kids he had, and who his uncles and friends and nephews were, what positions he held. You can find out anything you want about the poor guy. He's getting exposed in front of federal marshals. They're going to go arrest him. Anyway, they weren't throwing them in jail so much at the time, but they were still they were looking for trouble, and they knew it. So, at any rate, they exposed one of these guys who was a post-manifesto marriage from 1905, and they used that to rip on Francis M. Lyman, who was the president of the Quorum of the 12 at the time. He says, even if President Lyman may have made up his mind for himself that the Woodruff Manifesto was not really operative until 6 years ago, that's 1905, Elder Thompson comes within the limit. Which quote kind of confirmed to me that quote that I got was not just bogus, it was just bad citation. And apparently he was teaching in Open General Conference that the manifesto was given in 1890 but was not operative, meaning you absolutely could not until 1904. So, interesting stuff. As I was researching some of these things, I ran across a man named Ivan Nielsen. And I'd never met him, never heard of him. Ivan Nielsen. And never heard of him, never met him, but I had a friend who said, he's got stuff, you'll want it, he won't give it to me, he likes your book, Adam God Teachings, maybe he'll give it to you. So I went to his house and met him, and he's a fundamentalist, he's a really, really nice man, very generous, and he talked to me for like 2 hours, and kind of feeling me out. And he grabbed a book off the bookshelf and said, here's a signature of John Taylor. He has a personal copy of a French dictionary signed by John Taylor. And he said, I almost threw this one out. And he pulls out another book, and it says, to my beloved daughter, da-da-da-da, Hiram Smith. And on he went. He just had tons of amazing books, old newspaper articles, fascinating materials. And I said, I understand you've got some of this material. I'd like to get it. If you don't want me to publish it, I just need access. I want to understand what was going on and, write on these topics. And he said, you know what? Somebody came and later found out it was Damon Smith. Anybody know Damon Smith? Later found out it was Damon Smith that had scanned it, and he said, he scanned a whole bunch of my stuff. I don't even know what's on there, but you can have it. So the original Quorum of 12 trial minutes for Apostles Taylor and Cowley were part of what he gave to me, along with a host of other really interesting material. Quotes or letters from Heber J. Grant, Joseph F. Smith, and Francis Lyman, and signatures and everything, all scanned. It's great. It's really, really good material. So I started looking into the trial of Apostles Taylor and Cowley. How many of you are familiar with those trials? Same 4 people. All right. Well, let me give you the gist of it. When I first started writing on this topic, I thought, I've seen publications that have their trial minutes, but none of them seem to be really complete and legit. And so I was concerned that there were differences between the different trial minutes, and I wanted to know why, and I wanted to know what's made up, what's not made up, that sort of thing. So when I got the trial minutes, I had my secretary type them all up for me, and then I revised and edited them, and then I started annotating, and the next thing I know, I thought I should probably do this as a book because I'm obsessed and I can't quit. That's what I do. I've got 4 or 5 books in queue right now, and this is my 5th one. So I started looking into their situation. John W. Taylor was the son of John Taylor, the prophet, and he was from a plural wife, and he was known as the prophet of the Quorum. Amazing man, really, really interesting life story. Quinn notes that he was one of the most prolific prophetic people of the era. He literally would go to people's houses and prophesy on a regular basis. And one time, in fact, he went to Apostle Abraham H. Cannon's new plural wife, who he didn't believe he got married because it was a post-manifesto marriage, and he didn't believe that Apostle Abraham Cannon would do it. So he went to meet her, and she was pregnant, and he was talking to her, and he said, you're going to have a big baby boy. He's going to have bright red hair. He's going to have a cowlick. And he visited her about 9 months later, and she had a big fat baby boy. He was bright red hair, and he had a cowlick. So his prophecies were really, really specific, and regularly making prophecies. And so he was known as Prophet of the Quorum. But he was prolific in doing post-manifesto plural marriages. He claimed it very kind of serendipitously. If you read the trial minutes, you'll see he was really careful about it, but he finally basically says, if I ever married anybody polygamously after the manifesto, it was with the permission of the prophet. And Quinn has documented a lot of that. B. Carmen Hardy's documented a lot of that. Kenneth Cannon, who is an attorney up in Salt Lake, documented a bunch of it in the 70s as well. And other academics have documented as well. And you can go check up their research, and it pans out. It's solid. So he he was being put on trial for marrying a woman in 1909. Nope, 1906. Her name was Ellen Sandberg. It was his typewriter. And as they got into the trial, they were asking him questions about a bunch of other post-manifesto marriages, and he admitted to about 90 on one trip. He said a good many of which were post-manifesto marriages, and they were performed with Apostle John Henry Smith, who was in the first presidency in 1911 when he was tried. He's obviously related to the prophet as well. So there were things like this going on, and they started asking him questions, and he was not forthcoming. And he said, I'm protecting people in essence, and I'm not going to give the information out. Okay, I'm just going to read off the back cover, but I'm going to give you the insights that aren't on the back cover. I originally wrote it to be like that, but it didn't pan out very well. So, sometime after his membership trial in 1911, Apostle Matthias F. Cowley claimed that he and Apostle John W. Taylor were no more guilty than those who supposedly took action against us. And I know his claim was worthy of careful scrutiny. He says, we were no more guilty than the people who took action. While a few members of the 12 who disciplined Apostles Taylor and Cowley were completely uninvolved in new marriages after the 1890 manifesto, that would be David O. McKay, Joseph Fielding Smith, who later became a prophet in the 60s, 70s. Sorry, I'm not good at that time. 70s, all right. I was a convert in the early 90s. So. And Charles Penrose, these were all new apostles who had come along. All the old apostles were involved pretty much. And I've got a chart that shows what they were doing and what they were involved with and that sort of stuff in the book with footnotes and documentation. While some were not aware, one married a plural wife in the fall of 1904. That would be Orson F. Whitney. Another was recently engaged to a plural... No, that's not Orson F. Whitney. Who was that? 1904. Sorry, I'll have to review that. Another was recently engaged to a potential plural wife, 1910. That was Orson F. Whitney. At least two others courted potential plural wives after 1890. One was Heber J. Grant, and the other was Anthony W. Ivins. Heber J. Grant, when he got engaged after the manifesto, he finally proposed, or sorry, not engaged, he proposed. When he proposed to her, she had to say no, but I don't think she explained it to him right away, but she was already married to another apostle who married her after the manifesto. Another approved scores of plural marriages, that would be Joseph F. Smith. We have documented he probably approved at least 100. I wouldn't be surprised if all of them were approved by Joseph F. Smith personally, excepting those who went straight through George Buchanan before Joseph F. Smith was in the presidency. Another assisted Apostle Taylor in marrying about 90 couples, a good many of which were plural marriages in 1897. That was John Henry Smith. However, two of these fellow guilty apostles did not attend the trials of Apostles Taylor and Cowley, and a third attended in relative silence because he was recently engaged. He was kind of on low profile. Rutger Clausen, that was in 1904. He was pretty quiet too. He said almost nothing in the trials, both of them did. Ironically, especially in Cowley's trial, because Cowley is the one who performed the post-manifesto plural marriage for Apostle Clausen. Amidst this confusion, Apostle Cowley's trial ultimately led to a 2-day stalemate that required an unusual compromise. This is documented in John Henry Smith's journal and Heber J. Grant's journal of the era. Difficult to get a hold of unless you have the CD-ROM from Signature Books. But really good information there. I can actually get journal excerpts of Heber J. Grant online. I don't remember where, but I found it somewhere. Amazing information, really good stuff. Just as juicy as you can get historical stuff. And he at any rate, they document that Apostle Francis M. Lyman and Charles W. Penrose and somebody else, I'm trying to remember the name, they wanted Matthias F. Cowley excommunicated and pushed for it really hard, and nobody else would vote for it. They just wouldn't have anything to do with it. Matthias Cowley was a well-loved apostle. Everybody knew him. Everybody liked him. He's a puppy dog. I mean, he's just a teddy bear kind of a guy, just real friendly and lovable. And nobody wanted to put him through that. He said, I'd rather be taken out and shot dead than lose my church membership. And actually, the reason they found out he's involved in post-manifesto plural marriages was because one of his post-manifesto plural wives betrayed him, wrote a letter to Anthony W. Ivins and later Francis M. Lyman, giving the skinny on all the things that he'd been doing, and said, please don't let him know. And I've got the original letter. You can read her handwriting. It's in here. It's really, really interesting. Is there a question I saw? Or?
I was just going to ask, why were they going to excommunicate him, but you answered it.
Oh yeah, because he was the most prolific, and he, when he was questioned before the members of the Quorum of the 12, he was very free about it. And this is the kind of thing that you won't get unless you read the trial minutes 10, 15 times, or if you read my footnotes. But they go in there, they've got a list, and you can read the list. They say, ask Brother Matthias Cowley about, and it's right here. They've got a list of people that they want to ask him about, and you can see in the trial minutes they're asking about certain of these people. And they start asking it, then all of a sudden he starts volunteering some like 25 couples they didn't even get close to asking about. They weren't related to anybody they were asking about. He just starts spewing it out. Really, really helpful. He didn't want to get in trouble. He wanted to be in the good graces, so he just gave them everything they wanted and lots more. And you can in the book I go through and point out which ones weren't scheduled to be asked about, but he just kind of spilled the beans on them anyways. And which ones were on the Salt Lake Tribune list, which ones were on Anthony W. Ivins' post-manifesto marriage rules that he kept down in Mexico for the apostles. So, at any rate, if you never heard that there were post-manifesto plural marriages, I'm sure this is just kind of like I was, really confusing at first. But if you get into learning about them, I think this makes it really, really easy. My wife is my biggest critic on my writings of this sort of stuff. Go ahead. Sorry. Oh, you're eating it, so you're not delivering. Sorry. When she read with me Quinn's book, it's not really a book, it's an article, but it's printed. It's a little book on post-manifesto plural marriages. We just both felt really confused about it. She read this and she thought it's so easy to understand. So as I was preparing the trial minutes, I thought, this is just going to go over the heads of a lot of people, not because they're dense, but just because we don't hear about this in the church. And when we do, it's in a very negative context. You need to leave the church and you need to go join some group because, whatever. They usually say all the brethren are lying or something like this. And so I thought it'd be helpful to get a really good context. So at any rate, I did a 75-page introduction to explain how this all started. Have any of you heard of the Reed Smoot hearings? You and you and you. All right. I read pretty much most all of it. If you've seen it, it's a congressional record, and you put it on the shelf, it's about this thick, and it's just got all sorts of really interesting information. That's where most of the post-manifesto plural marriages were originally discovered. And so I go through how that happened, and go through Heber J. Grant's journals, and John Henry Smith's journals, and Abraham H. Cannon's journals, and John W. Taylor's comments in those meetings, explaining the evolution of how the 1890 Manifesto was first understood, how it was interpreted, how it was reacted to. Very strong different reactions. Some said I loved it, I endorsed it, I felt fuzzy, and John W. Taylor's reaction was it. And that was his reaction. And that's right there in the journal. And then we've got no less than, I'll retract that, 6 to 8 apostles writing in their journals or testifying in public places that they did not believe the 1890 Manifesto was a revelation, did not accept it as such, and it was a policy only. You had a question?
Yeah, so is the conclusion that after the manifesto, there was a transition time before it phased totally into the doctrine of the church?
Yes.
And so it shouldn't be a surprise that there were these things going on.
Yes.
And I'm guessing they would still be valid because the priesthood that authorized that were also valid.
Yes. David O. McKay, Heber J. Grant, and let me think. I want to say Joseph Fielding Smith. I'd have to double check. It's one of those things when you get thousands of facts, you start missing some. But anyway, 3 of the prophets later in private communications and letters said, we accept these as legitimate marriages. Heber J. Grant acknowledged that on 2 different occasions that post-manifesto marriages were legitimate. He said in one place, "I've never had anything against any of the marriages performed by Apostle John W. Taylor before he had left the quorum." Now, what did he mean leave the quorum in 1905 when he resigned, or did he mean left the quorum whenever he was excommunicated? A little bit fuzzy by the way it's said and by their attitudes at the time. Heber J. Grant actually came to Joseph F. Smith shortly after John W. Taylor was dropped from the quorum on October 28, 1905, and said, "I feel like if you're going to release him, you should release me, because the only difference between him and me is he got caught and I didn't." So he was very friendly towards the cause, as it was a post-manifesto polygamy. Yeah.
Do you have historical documentation of Taylor's cursing of Grant?
Yes, that's in here too.
Is it?
Yeah, because interestingly, in the George Albert Smith doesn't go to his trial, but they talk to him about it, and they say, "Is it true that you cursed George Albert Smith?"
Yeah,
Yeah, and he says, "No, I just told him that if he didn't stop talking about me, the curse of the Lord would be upon him." and interestingly, John Henry Smith is also not at the trial, maybe because of that, and so is Joseph F. Smith not at trial, maybe because of that. But Hiram Smith and Joseph Fielding Smith were both at his trial, and they both had strong issues with John W. Taylor because of this. For those of you who don't know, George Albert Smith broke down in 1930 General Conference. Is it 30? He was giving a public talk and he had a mental breakdown right there in the middle of the conference in front of everybody. He was later institutionalized, and he had a couple episodes of that during his life while he was serving as a prophet. In fact, there was a period of time when he was incapacitated. And people who actually have mental illness feel that this story should be brought out more because they see him as a hero, somebody who really overcame his mental illness and was able to still become prophet of the church and still help a lot of people and do all the things he accomplished as a man. So he broke down and had a mental breakdown and ended up in the hospital for like 1.5 years, 2 years, something like that. I footnoted that. And interestingly, George Albert Smith later in his life said that the reason I had that mental breakdown was because John W. Taylor cursed me. So
that's what I wanted to. I've been looking for more information on that because
Quinn's Extensions of Powers has got all the juicy footnotes on that, and I haven't been able to find anything else really substantial outside of that. Just a couple little morsels here and there. Probably if we got to the journal entries that were around this time period, we'd get a whole lot, but I didn't really look into that heavily. It was really interesting, and it was a footnote, but it wasn't something that I looked into seriously. So, I guess where from there? One of the things that I did, because of this comment, he says, "We were no more guilty than those who supposedly took action against us." And that's true and not true at the same time. You had a question?
I was just going to ask you about the unpublished revelations.
Okay. Love the volumes.
What's that?
I love the volumes.
How many volumes?
The 2 volumes. Oh, you're not talking about Collier's unpublished revelations? Yeah, there are 2 volumes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But you can also get them, or you could access them earlier, but they're not accessible any longer, just to view.
That's what I heard, yes. A lot of those have been published in different places, though. For instance, I think it's an 1882 revelation given to Wilford Woodruff, was published in the Doctrine and Covenants in a couple of different versions in different languages. So that was available and accessible. The 1886 revelation that's in there is, the actual copy of it's in here because it was referred to in the trial. Let's see if I can pull it up real quick. But other than that, there's really...
I thought only John Taylor's 1883 or 82 was in the foreign edition, so I didn't know Wilford Woodruff was.
Oh, yeah, maybe I got that backwards. So yeah, these copies have been, you can find them in several different places. Most of them aren't as clean as this because I use Photoshop to kind of touch up the dirt. I don't touch up the letters at all and increase the contrast, that sort of stuff. But it's 2 pages. And we've got a copy of John W. Taylor's copy of it as well here. And interestingly, that was the one that was read in the trial, which I read before was not accurate, but there are several there are typographical errors that John W. Taylor made when he copied it, including reversing some words on accident and some commas he added and some things that are not in the original. We know that, or I prove, I think, very handily that it was his version that was used at trial. It was read at trial and it was typed up there. So there's a couple of them that we've got really strong access to. A lot of those in Collar's unpublished revelations have been published in Millennial Star and in Messenger and Advocate and things like that.
So there are second and third witnesses.
Oh yeah, for most of it. Collier, for those of you who don't know, he and Tom Green went into special collections. I actually went to a meeting, was surprised to see Tom Green there. It was an interesting experience for me. I went to
He's not still in jail?
No. No, I went to actually a seminar on how to prosecute polygamists by Dave Levitt, and he talked about how he got Tom Green in jail, and that was really interesting too. But anyway, I got to hear Tom's side of the story a little bit later, which, anyway, he's a really interesting guy. But anyway, he told me the story about unpublished revelations because that's what I wanted to know. And he said, well, we went in together, Fred Collier and him. They had empty microfiche cans, and they went into church archives. They took a microfiche out of the real one, stuck it in there, tossed it out the window, basically, to the other person. They wouldn't make copies, and then they had a line to toss them back up, or they would come in with it, and then they would replace it at the end of the day. And so they did that with several microfiche, and then later they just photocopied those and published them. That's how I got most of that stuff. However, most of that stuff is available from other sources, so you know that he didn't make it all up. But how you feel about him stealing stuff from church or borrowing stuff from church archives is a different story. But yeah, he actually has a whole bunch more that he just won't publish. I run a publication company on the side because it's cheaper than paying people to publish my books for me. And I said, you get them to me, I'll publish it for free. I want anything that you've got, because I've heard the microfiche are wearing old and aren't working very well anymore. But he won't do it. He's kind of his own man. He says he's the one mighty and strong, and he's the key holder. And anyway, so he's his own thing.
Dang, introduce him.
Yeah, yeah. Funnily, I'm amongst all these other stupid things I do, I'm a professional juggler on the side. And I used to do a juggling club at my house. And while he was in jail, one of his sons started coming to my juggling club. So that's how I ended up kind of meeting him, or finding out about him later, I guess. Okay, so I kind of run myself in a circle. One last thing I wanted to say, and sorry for all people listening to the podcast and my awful presentation. One thing that I did is I wanted to research this statement. We were supposedly no more guilty than those who took action against us. And I knew that some of it was true because I'd read some of Quinn's work, and I've read Hardy's work, and Richard von Wagner, and some other scholars who had done some research on post-manifesto marriages. But I wanted to know really how much. And so I compiled all the information I could find on each one of these people, and I did biographical vignettes. Charles W. Penrose was one of the young guys, and there was not much on him. There was like 15 pages of documented post-manifesto plural marriage involvements of Joseph F. Smith. So I created all that and put it into a chart. These are apostles serving in 1911, and the shaded areas are the times when they're serving, and the letters indicate things that they were doing to be involved in post-manifesto plural marriage, and I've got it all broken down, so it's whether they were dating somebody, or if they proposed, or if they performed a plural marriage, or if they were just preaching to people. Francis N. Lyman, for instance, said, you can't be in any of our prayer circles unless you believe in plural marriage. That was back when they had private prayer circles in their stake centers and stuff like this.
Now, 11, that's when the trial took
That's
place,
when the
right?
trials took place, yeah. I was supposed to have it out for the 100-year anniversary, but I'm a slacker, so I didn't get it done for a year later. So, at any rate, if you look carefully, and I've marked who was at the trial, right? So you see up here, a couple of the old guys show up at the trial. All of the new guys show up at the trial. If you look up here, these are the older guys, and they're all doing stuff. They're all involved in post-manifesto plural marriages. Whether it's performing it, authorizing it, courting, dating, doing something. And the more you go down, of course, you see less and less involvement. by anybody. And the people who were not involved, they're the ones who are trying them. People who are involved are not so much the ones trying them. They were, however, serving at the time. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And I'll end on one note, I guess, as far as this book's concerned, just answer questions. But one thing that was really interesting that I found, and a couple other scholars had referenced, but I didn't think they really capitalized on how profound of a difference this was. But in 1911, just before these trials took place, the Salt Lake Tribune had finished publishing a series of articles, which I've typed up and put in here, the articles and original scans of the lists and so forth. There's a little bit of controversy over how those have been reported in the past, so I just got original scans so you could see them for yourself and not have to trust whoever's scholarship on it. But the Tribune had posted all these lists of post-manifesto plural marriages, and all this stuff was supposed to be dead and gone and behind them. And, they'd gone through the Reed Smoot hearings, and people had forgotten about the post-manifesto plural marriages, and everybody said we're sorry and we're a state and everything's good until the Tribune puts these lists out. And then the church says, we've got to do something. We're losing face. The Tribune on a daily basis is having, and you can go and scan through these old newspaper things, it's almost daily. They're saying, Joseph F. Smith is the biggest liar on the planet. And, and then they quote things that he said from the Reed Smoot hearings, and then stuff that's going on and proving that, there were discrepancies in what was said and this sort of stuff. It was awful. It was a nightmare for the church. And then they started doing the same thing with Francis M. Lyman. Meanwhile, Reed Smoot didn't get as unblemished either. They really ripped on him during the whole Reed Smoot hearing era. So 1910, all these newspaper articles come out. 1911, one of them comes out, and they decide they have to do something. The Quorum of the 12 Minutes are discussing the problem, and they say very frankly, we determined that if anybody had been involved in a post-manifesto marriage previous to 1904, that we would absolutely leave them alone unless they were prominent in the church and it was a public kind of a thing, and if it wouldn't hurt their feelings if we disciplined them. So this policy was implemented just before these trials, and it's fascinating to me in that context, because if you read John W. Taylor, he is one of those men who will just stand you down. If you're 100 pounds heavier than him and bearing your fist and you got a sword, he'll just stare you in the face and say, I will not yield. Just that kind of a guy. And he was not afraid to take the public blame. He'd already done it in 1905. He was the fall guy, resigned his apostleship for performing post-manifesto plural marriages to try and save face for the church. That's heavily documented in here as well. It's been documented in other places that it was a political move and everybody knew it. And he's the one that gets excommunicated. And he's the one that won't back down. He's big, popular celebrity type figure, and he's not offended if they're going to excommunicate him. He says, you got authority, you do whatever you want, I don't care. He only says that after he's had a 4-hour conversation with Joseph F. Smith, who had approved most of the marriages through John W. Taylor to people in Canada mostly. And on the other hand, you get Apostle Cowley. And Apostle Cowley is this teddy bear guy. He's crushed by the idea that they don't like him anymore. He really is struggling. He says several times, I want to be united with you. I feel really badly. I've always tried to follow the prophet. I've always tried to do what I was supposed to do. Please don't excommunicate me. Make John W. Taylor a false prophet. You said you were going to excommunicate me. I'll do anything you want to make it right. And he's clearly going to be offended if they do something to him. So they just say, you can't use the priesthood until we say so later. That's pretty much all that happens to Cowley. Not a big deal. Maybe on a personal level, I'm sure it's a big deal, but compared to getting excommunicated, not a big deal, considering that he married probably twice as many people as John W. Taylor, and or authorized them. And he's the one who was associating with people engaged in the fundamentalist movement. John W. Taylor isn't. So, that policy really, to me, showed a lot about how they implemented it, because they were both doing stuff after 1904. And it just happened to be that John W. Taylor was an in-your-face kind of guy, And Apostle Callie was just a friendly, you know, one of those softies. He really was a softie.
Was he reinstated in the church?
They were both reinstated. John W. Taylor was reinstated, I think, 1965. I've got his reinstatement information in here. Post-mortem. No explanation, nothing. They just said, absolutely, we're glad to do it. Joseph F. Smith went to his plural wife, Nellie. She was, trying to remember what her full name was, Janet, but they called her Nettie and Nellie. At any rate, he went to her after John W. Taylor had died. He went to her at nighttime and brought his temple clothes and gave the temple clothes and said, bury him in his temple clothes. So they did a closed casket viewing, or closed rather than doing a viewing, they did a closed casket funeral. At any rate, so that's one of those things that makes it kind of raises your eyebrows as to what was going on behind closed doors. His family record was that Joseph F. Smith had told him, you know, just take the fall and you'll be fine for it. Don't worry about it. And so he did. And there are actually a number of little family traditions and records that talk about things like this. Matthias Cowley actually baptized him and reinstated him in the church with the stake president, but that was refuted by the church, and they said that's no good, and they wouldn't allow that to be effective. But they did reinstate him, you know, upon being asked in 1965. I think he'd actually asked a couple times before then. Matthias Cowley, I think, later was formally given the right to use his priesthood again. And all I got in here, actually, in the book, is that his son said that he had the bishop and so forth baptize him and that sort of stuff. But I've read other sources I couldn't verify that said that he was blessing his family at home and that sort of stuff, and it was kind of a normal thing. So I don't know how much they really expected him not to use this priesthood. All right, any questions, or is everybody hot and suffocating and ready to go home?
That's funny, I don't think anyone's complaining.
I have one. When are you going to start reprinting some of these things?
Like what?
In the Adam God, have you started thinking about that, or maybe I missed the memo that you were thinking about something?
With the extra pages?
With the extra pages too.
Yeah. I printed 1,000. I've sold over 900, and I've got some here today, and I still have enough that I don't know if you know the book industry really thoroughly, but as soon as a book goes out of print, the price skyrockets. I announced a year or so ago, 2 years ago, that I was pulling it. It was out of print, and I gave it to the bookstores, and immediately they started selling $175. And so I've deliberately kept copies so that I could sell them at a lower price and keep that cost down. I sell them directly at 60. The stores are doing them 80 or 100. So that's what I do. And as far as the extra stuff on the second printing, I'm probably not going to do a second printing. I've been doing digital copies, selling those to people who want them, again, to keep the cost down. But the reason is, for me, this is the kind of thing that I sleep with on my bedside and I'm all happy with, And actually, for any of you who know Liesl Brown, he said that for years he's kept it at his nightstand next to his bed. It's one of his favorite books. So, he doesn't say favorite book, but he says he keeps it next to his bedstand, which to me suggests that it's one of his favorite. I don't keep a book there unless it's my favorite book. So, at any rate, besides us nerds who like to read stuff that's this thick, this was intended to be a reference book. It wasn't intended to be read from cover to cover, but I wanted to present it in a way that was irrefutable and academic. I wanted everybody to be able to say, okay, I can go find the Millennial Star. They've been reprinted for the most part. And I can go look this quote up. Every single one has a citation. You can find the original source. And I had it Smythsonian bound. I had it published from a company in New York, so it'd be extra nice. It's got strong paper. I mean, they're really strong and durable. But I didn't intend it to be a novel, to be read from cover to cover. But I've had a lot of people, since I wrote it, say, okay, do you have an abridged version? Something like shorter that I can read that tells me what he taught in a nutshell and explains it, because it's confusing to me. I've had dozens and dozens of people have told me that. So I'm actually working on a second volume. It'll be a few years before it's out, not only on this teaching, but it's going to be called Forgotten Mormon Teachings. and it covers other 19th century doctrines that have kind of faded out into the obscurity, and we didn't ever really teach that. That was speculation to, I don't know what you're talking about type doctrines. Really good, fun, deep stuff. I love that sort of thing. So that the stuff, the juicy stuff will be in that second volume, and that will include any of the new stuff that I found. That said, anybody who gets my book, I've said for years, I'll give you for free the extra stuff. It's all stuff I found. I think I've got 2 quotes other people found that are new, and none of them add anything doctrinally. They're just of interest. But the book's broken down. For instance, in the very beginning, you can see I broke it down and very, very specific and precise. I really hate scholarship that's kind of sloppy, and I'm just one of those really tweaked individuals. So I've got I don't have one chapter that says Adam is God. I've got 5, and it's broken into subchapters, and here's how they go. Adam is God the Father. These don't say Elohim is God the Father. These don't say Adam is a God. These don't say Adam is like a God unto us. These say Adam is God, period. 100 quotes. Adam is Father of our spirits. Now, we could extrapolate and say that means Adam's God, right? I mean, Father of our spirits, that's God. We all believe that. That's taught in the temple. We all get that, right? But that's not Adam being God. You have to do modus tollens there, and it's an implied thing, so I separate it. It's different. So then we've got God is Father of spirits, God is Father of bodies, and then Adam is Father of Christ. Again, that's something we say, okay, well, God is the Father of Christ, and therefore, if Adam is God, that would be the case. But they specifically say Adam is the Father of Jesus Christ, period. When he was with Mary, the whole 9 yards, it's all there. And it says Adam, not God. And then it says God is Father of Christ, Christ is Father of righteousness. I've just got some excerpts of those to explain some of the nuances of, well, maybe what he really meant was, that sort of stuff, so you can compare the quotes. And then Adam is Michael the archangel. That's not controversial in the church today because it's in the temple. But there's a kind of, you just have to read. There's a different context in 19th century of how they understood things that makes that a little bit more significant in 19th century thought. Scriptures and lore of Michael, and then Adam is Ancient of Days. And again, we don't have any problem in modern churches saying, sure, Adam is the Ancient of Days. We all know that. That's no problem. But in 19th century Protestantism, almost everybody referred to the Ancient of Days as God. They recognized that scripture is talking about God. And so that association for 19th century Mormonism makes a big difference. And in fact, of all the quotes saying Joseph Smith taught that Adam was God, we can't find any quote from Joseph saying Adam is God. But we find him saying Adam is Ancient of Days. And that may very well be where some of the connect happened with some of the early Mormons. So, at any rate, no other author's done a section on Eve. I've got 5 chapters on Eve and what he teaches about Eve, being Adam's wife, is an immortal God before he came here, and how that has to do with plan of salvation and so forth. So, that's a long answer to your question. I've got them available still, so I'm not really out of print, but they're out of the bookstores, minus I think there are 3 Benchmark books in Salt Lake.
I don't know where I heard that you couldn't get them anywhere.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. You can't get them anywhere, except for Benchmark just got 2 from me the other day. So.
Or Amazon for $120.
Right. Yeah, you can get them there. But I've got them right here, and the reason is I intended to keep some for my kids and grandkids or whatever, that sort of thing. But I'm not as precisely organized. So I had some in my closet, and I had some in my basement in my storage, and some in my garage in storage. And when I put them all together, I had about 30 too many. So I still have some available. I'm going to start putting them on eBay pretty soon, just to kill those $120 sales. That makes me it really bothers me to see books go up for $400 or $500. It happens all the time, and so yeah, I'm the only real person you can get them from, except for Benchmark right now.
But eventually there will be needing to be another printing, right?
Maybe. What I might end up doing.
Nobody else cares.
Yeah. Well, it's possible, but I've offered the CD-ROM, and frankly,
Yeah, we gotta have some for our kids.
Sorry. Some people, and I haven't. I'm an attorney and I haven't pushed it, but they put my whole book online. You can find it online. So it will be available. It just might not be a nice book. But by the time that this is completely out of print, I think I'll have my next book out, and rather than being a reference book, it'll have a book with a reference CD-ROM, and then it'll have the actual teachings, and I'll probably do quite a bit of commentary and that sort of stuff with it. But I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that. But yeah.
On the apostles on trial, you get how did the minutes of the trial get out? I mean, you can't go down to Salt Lake and say, hey, we want their meeting from last Thursday night at the temple.
Yeah.
And get the minutes from last Thursday's
Yeah, where
meeting.
did the original ones come from? I'm trying to remember his name. I've got it in a footnote. There was a... I don't have to think on this. Let's see if I can find his name. He got a copy. He was cleaning the temple. He got a copy.
Look at that.
And then he started passing out copies. That's originally how it came out. He actually, I'm trying to remember.
So does the church say, oh, that's bogus, somebody made it up, and that's just...
No, I don't think they've ever refuted the legitimacy of the minutes. They've been out for 100 years probably. I mean, they were
pretty much immediately.
Yeah, it wasn't very long after. This is on day 2 of the trial. Dallas Barrett claims he could obtain a copy of the original trial minutes. He thereafter gave the minutes to Guy Musser, gave the minutes to Joseph Musser, and Ivan Nielsen married Joseph Musser's widow. And so he ended up with this huge library, so that you can just connect the dots. At any rate, their Signature Books did a really good version of the minutes years and years ago, but now it's like, I don't know, $14,000, who knows what it is. It's out of print, it's hard to find. So we were due for a good scholarly version, because all the stuff that's been done, except for theirs, has been, people have made changes. They're like published anonymously, and they make these subtle little changes, and some of them are significant, and some of them are frankly egregious, but a lot of them are just kind of, they're not being careful about copying and so forth. So I was just really careful to make sure every tiny thing is right. And you can see the original correspondence between Francis M. Lyman when he's writing to Apostles Taylor and Cowley. You got the summonses and the complaints and betrayal letters and all of the handwritten stuff, and then I've got a typed version you can read. I did it a little oversized because a lot of the original letters are difficult to read. If you blow them up really big on your computer, you can figure some of them out, but other than that, when they're just normal size, they're really difficult 19th century handwriting type thing. Really tricky to read, so I typed everything up, and I had 3 editors go over every little period and stuff to make sure we got it right this time. Okay. All right, we've got one more question.
I'm just wondering why they don't talk about the Adam God. I usually call it the theory, but what do you call it?
I understand. I named it Adam God Teachings because people in the church are offended if you call them Adam God Doctrine, and people who believe in it are offended when you call it Adam God Theory.
So why don't they talk about it now? That's what
Well, Bruce R. McConaughey labeled it one of the 7 deadly heresies that will lead you down to hell, so that's a prominent reason. There's a chapter in Craig Colson's book, the Adam God book that I said I don't like earlier. And I've never met Craig. Maybe he's a really nice guy. I just at that point in my life was offended by how he wrote it. But he has a fabulous chapter that I really, really enjoyed. And he does good research. It's not like he's sloppy in his research. He actually does have good citations and stuff. But he does a chapter, he calls it Devolution of a Doctrine. And he outlines the Edward Bunker trial. He outlines the Orson Pratt controversies with Brigham Young, where they're fighting over. Brigham Young basically says, if you don't believe this, I'm going to beat it into you. And the apostles actually unanimously voted to excommunicate Orson Pratt for not believing Adam God teachings. And Brigham Young said, if I have to wrestle him down to the ground, put him in a headlock or something. I don't remember what he said, but I'll drive it into him, And there were others who were excommunicated or threatened with excommunication for not believing Adam God teachings. They were in the temple endowment, and they were very clear in the temple endowment. And so, but a lot of people...
So are you saying the endowment has changed also as a result of that?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, the endowment has changed a lot.
Well, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. In the early 20th century, it was changing a lot. There's a fabulous new book out, for those who aren't aware, put out by Signature Books. how many are familiar with Joseph Smith's Quorum of the Anointed?
Joseph Smith's what?
Joseph Smith's Quorum of the Anointed. Then the endowment companies. Now there's a third one. It's called the Development of LDS Ritual and Temple Worship, or something like that. Really good. It covers a lot of the development of the temple endowment, but they don't. Even that is well done as it is. It's missing some stuff. So it was taught in the endowment, but people had a hard time with it, and it's one of those, in retrospect, a duh issue. How many of you are converts? Just me and a couple others. Okay, if you're a convert and you come from a Christian background, it's really obvious that Adam is the most wicked man that ever lived in this planet, and all of our sufferings are his fault. Right? That's Protestantism. It's Catholicism. And so you take people from that background, and then you say, oh, by the way, Adam's God. And it's a disconnect. You've got some major mental dissonance that just doesn't make that happen. And so a lot of people had a hard time with it. People were offended with it. There are commentaries in newspaper articles where people say, they taught me this lovely restored gospel in England. I come over here and they're teaching blood atonement and Adam God stuff. It's just really offensive and it's wrong and I hate it and I'm gone. And they apostatize. And so they had these meetings in the Quorum of 12. And this is all in Craig Tholson's book. I didn't go into the controversies in my book. I was interested in the teaching, not the history of the fighting and that sort of stuff. I wanted to dissociate myself from that. So they had these meetings, and they said, what do we do about this? People are apostatizing because of Adam God teachings. And initially, a bit of the response was, well, we only teach it in the temple, we'll just kind of keep it quiet. But it got more and more heated and more of a problem. And they decided in their Quorum of 12 meetings, this is not essential to your salvation. It's not required for people to believe this and enter heaven. It's gone. And the next thing we know, we've got Wilford Woodruff's famous quote, if you're into Adam God teachings, this famous quote that says, Adam is Adam, Christ is Christ, Jehovah is Jehovah, and get over it, basically. And just don't worry about these things. And they just quit teaching it. So my personal understanding is the reason they quit teaching it is because people were losing their testimonies by the droves, and they felt it wasn't necessary for salvation, so they pulled it. Yeah.
Did Brigham Young make statements about the origins of the Adam God teachings, either like whether he learned it from Joseph Smith or personal revelation? Or?
Yeah, I've got a chapter on that. I think there are about a dozen quotes that Joseph taught it, some from his plural wives, saying Joseph taught this doctrine in Nauvoo, but he did it kind of on the quiet and the sly, which is problematic, right? Because we've got this quote from Joseph Smith who says, I always taught the strongest doctrines in public. But then we've got private journals, and we've got private statements, and we've got records that were not public record of him teaching things that were very much deeper doctrines that were not made public, and not in his public discourses. So, and around the same time, though, Joseph Smith says, the people claim I have more than one wife, and I can only find one. At the time, he's got like 38. So, is he lying in public to preserve the church's name? That was common standard fare in the early 20th century. During the Reed-Smoot hearings, they said, protect the name of the church. If you have to lie, it's fine, but don't lie to protect yourself. And so was he doing that, or was he doing something else? That kind of goes on a personal basis on how you're going to handle that. Yes, sir.
Did the Adam God theory, Adam God teaching ever go outside of Adam being God of any other world besides this one?
No.
Or was it always pertaining to this world?
Yes. Yeah, that goes into one of my issues for my next book that I'm kind of excited about, but I won't get into it because that's too much probably for this forum, at least online. But there were teachings that were very explicit, and there were a number of them that said there is one God for each earth, there's one Savior for each earth, and there's one devil for each earth. And that, to me, is very consistent with what I've read in all the Adam God quotes. All right. Well, you bet. I will end with this. When I joined the church, actually I said earlier 90s, but that's when I went on my mission. It was 1989, I think, that I got baptized, September 27, 89, as I recall. I was so enthralled to find the gospel. I grew up kind of pagan. My mom was an inactive Baptist. My dad was Buddhist Hindu. And I didn't have religion in my life, and it stunk. I hated it. And all sorts of things were going on in my life, and my parents were divorcing, and I was looking for God. And when I joined the church, I could not get enough. My first year in the church, I read the 4 standard works. I read 12 major books of the church: Jesus the Christ, Marvelous Work and Wonder, Lectures on Faith, like the Talmage version, and all sorts of things like this. I just couldn't stop reading. I was up late every night reading. I didn't have much to do since my parents were divorcing and my mom was gone all the time, so I was by myself, so I just read, devoured it, and I'm still like that. I'm totally addicted to Mormon doctrine. I love to read all the stuff. Last weekend I read a good portion of Millennial Star Volume 1. It was just so refreshing to me. I just love that stuff. That's what really got me into writing books, and that's kind of my intent when I'm writing, is to make resources available that, when they tend to be available, are available in an either anti-Mormon sense or an apologist sense that's really not giving good information either, and sometimes, frankly, lying. And I find both of those offensive. I don't think the truth has to be defended in that way. I think the Spirit can testify of the truth, and it's good to know, how to defend, I guess, against falsehoods. But I think if you just preach the truth, the Spirit can testify to people frankly and freely, and we don't have to apologize, and we certainly don't have to lie to apologize in our writings. And I think there's a really strong movement by members of the church to do so. And I don't by any means mean to suggest that the church encourages that. I don't think it does. But there are a lot of people who feel like they have to do anything to defend the name of somebody, even if they're just wrong. And if John W. Taylor said something and it offends you, sorry, he said it. Get over it. But I also think that it can be presented in a friendly fashion that doesn't defame the church, that doesn't defame a dead prophet, and that still lets people read and find out for themselves. So that's why I started writing books. That's why I'm going to continue to write books in that vein. I'm planning a volume called Silence and Mormon Polygamy 2, and I hope to prove B. Carmen Hardy right that will be the definitive volume on post-manifesto plural marriages, and I'll do not just apostles serving in 1911, but 1890 through 1911. So it'll be triple the size, with lots more information on the earlier brethren and that sort of stuff. And I'm preparing a book called Forgotten Mormon Teachings. It's going to cover 19th century plan of salvation, things that are no longer taught, and maybe for good reason. I don't really care to make judgment calls like that. It sure is interesting from a theological standard point. As a philosopher, I just think it's interesting if it's true or not. So, and I find a lot of those things really faith promoting as well. But it's not Sunday school material either. That's what I'm about.
So overall, what effect has your historical research had on your personal testimony of the gospel?
Oh, that's a tough question. I had an elders quorum meeting I went to. I'm trying to remember the year. I'd say 2001, maybe 2. And I had a brethren in the class say, "What do we know about the order of the resurrection?" And I thought, that's a fascinating topic. I just read about it last week in the Discourses of Brigham Young, and I started talking to him about it and answering his question. We were having this good conversation, and it probably wasn't the best place for it, but at any rate, it was an adult Sunday school, so it's not like little kids were around or something. But the teacher stopped, and he said, "It doesn't matter how many angels fit on the pin of a needle," and basically just kind of shut us down and moved on. It was on the topic. I mean, it was about the resurrection. The lesson was on the resurrection, but it kind of offended me, and I thought, Brigham Young taught this as doctrine, and here's somebody in a church meeting is saying it doesn't matter, and that doesn't sit right with me, and so I really struggle with that. And a couple of weeks later, I was sitting in class, and I was talking about something else I was reading, and it was a high priest in the elders quorum class just visiting, and as I recall, I could be wrong, maybe he wasn't a high priest, but I thought he was. And he said, "Elder, if you don't stop reading that stuff, you're going to apostatize." And I said, "I'm reading the words of the prophet. How is it really reading the words of the prophet I'm going to apostatize? It makes no sense to me." And he said, "You mark my words." And I was like, "All right." And it really got me thinking. I think it was Boyd K. Packer, and I'm subject to reproof on this, but I think it was Boyd K. Packer. He said, "Understanding doctrine changes behavior." I think he said, "Understanding true doctrine," is it Boyd K. Packer? Changes behavior. I remember because I was I worked at BYU cleaning. I was a cleanup guy in the religion professor's building, and I'm there 3 o'clock every morning cleaning trashes and dusting or whatever, and meeting Elder Benson, who is always there at like 3 or 4 in the morning in his stockings and cap and his pajamas, saying, "How come it's not open yet?" he loved to read, and he'd get there super early. But I'd be out cleaning their things, and one of the professors had that on his desk. And I don't remember the exact quote, but that's pretty much it. It says, "Understanding true doctrine changes behavior."
It's more than the study of behavior changes behavior.
Yeah, that's it. That's the quote. And to me, that's what it's all about. I love to study doctrine, and some of it maybe no. You don't have to go to heaven to learn certain things, or other way around. You don't have to learn certain things to go to heaven. But to me, it changes who I am. It changes how deeply I feel about the gospel, and having an understanding of who God is, who Adam is, who Christ is. To me, that changes me a lot, and that makes a difference on my day-to-day life. And so I would say that that's all it's really done for me, is it's deepened my conviction in the restoration and my understanding of the gospel. That said, I mean, the church has become so broad now that I can feel totally edified that I've learned something and share it with somebody else and they're offended. And there's a really good, there's a book out called "This Is My Doctrine, Development of Mormon Theology," and it covers some of those thoughts about why conservative Mormons are offended by liberal Mormons, and how they're reading the same scripture and interpreting it so differently. And it's a tough pill to swallow when I read the book. I really get offended by some of the interpretations that people have. But at the same time, he's very, very right in how our paradigms affect how we interpret Scripture. The same one. I can interpret it to mean one thing totally different than you, and yet we both say, I'm a true blood through Mormon, or whatever that quote is, the one I'm talking about. And both just feel staunch, as active as possible, and we love God more than anything, and yet have totally opposing views on certain doctrines. And so I still come across that challenge from time to time, but I've got friends like Sid and Rao, and he's really broad-minded and fun to talk with, and so I still get to explore all sorts of different things with different people. And writing books has been one of the best things that ever happened to me doctrinally, because I research way more than I used to. It's one thing to read your half-hour Book of Mormon a day. It's another to read half-hour Book of Mormon plus a bazillion other things and stay up late at night and that sort of stuff. My next book is going to be called The Nativity, What Every Latter-day Saint Should Know. I read 24 Christian commentaries on the Gospels of Matthew and Luke on that to put it together. Fabulous, fascinating stuff. Nothing's improved my testimony more than reading those things. And despite the fact I would never be comfortable being a Christian in a Christian church per se, very much feel Christian, but I wouldn't feel comfortable in living my life in a Baptist church, for instance. I would just not feel fulfilled. But I've never been edified so much as studying